What's up, WordPress warriors? Calvin and I, for another one here. For those of you that don't know, recently Elementor had Elementor Pro, specifically not the free version, but Elementor Pro had a pretty bad security vulnerability, which I think was at 8.8 out of 10.
Yeah,
which is pretty much when you start getting into that range, it's really, really, really bad. You don't need to know exactly what all these CVE scores mean. But 8.8 is pretty much your
out of 10.
Out of 10, your whole world is about to come crumbling down. So Calvin, why don't you show us maybe show us the patch stack screen? We can skim through that a little bit, give people a bit of context, and then we're going to jump around a little bit. And then ultimately, yeah, so this is patch stack here. Yeah, they don't, yeah, high severity, 8.8 out of 10. And let's just give them the the hyper simplified version is this effectively people write SQL injection privileges. Yeah.
The short version, yeah, we will link it in a post later if you want to take a look exactly. But the short version is that basically anybody without any authentication can update an arbitrary option in the WP options table to an arbitrary value. So they can, and they, depending on how your site works, what plugins you have installed, what they store in the database, they can do a lot of things.
Yep.
And this is really like a critical vulnerability. Do we want to show the
change log here? Yeah. So for those of you that don't know, and it's not your fault if you don't know, but Calvin's done a lot of auditing of a lot of security company plugins over the last year, 6 months at least. And what we see time and time again, and it's not, we're going to bag on Elementor here a little bit, but
everybody does this.
Everybody does. So this is 3.11.7 on the 22nd of last month. Tweak, improved security enforcement in WooCommerce components. And it's like, I mean, that's like saying like I bumped my head versus I have a hatchet wound in my head, And your favorite one was like somebody posted like beefed up cryptographic hashing or whatever, and it's like they don't ever come out and tell on themselves and say major security update. They just say tweak.
But there were a lot of these. The beefed up was definitely my favorite. Beefed up security.
Yeah. So unfortunately, we would love to trust the companies that we do business with. Like we're running Elementor on the GridPane website. We won't be for very long because this is not the most recent, very, very, very insecure sort of 0-day or heavily impacted security and vulnerability from them. But unfortunately, you have to really be vigilant because they're not going to come out and say, oh, by the way, we had an 8.8 out of 10. And you absolutely need to upgrade right now. Like if you saw that tweak, improve security, like you might think, oh, this is a security issue and I should upgrade. But they're never
maybe it can wait a day or whatever.
Yeah, whatever. And it's like this was proactively being exploited in real time because it was such a massive and prolific breach, and because it was so off the top, over the top powerful. So I think you're going to be doing a little bit of magic inside of PHP MyAdmin, and we're going to actually like exploit this thing.
Right. Let me see if I move this one over. Can you see the screen?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
So Calvin's in PHP MyAdmin here. Instead of actually dragging everybody through like a super exhaustive, like, let's look how this breach works, we're just going to do exactly what this breach could do, only we're going to have direct write access to the database. Okay. But we're going to,
it is the same. It's just like
the same thing.
It's exactly the same thing. Yep. So this is the database of this playground website right now.
Yep.
WordPress 6.6 website. Right now, it does not have Fortress activated. So the most vicious way that attackers exploited this vulnerability is first, they turned on the users can register option on your site.
Yep.
This by default controls whether there's the register button link shown on the WP login page. And what they then did is now they changed the default role to administrator. And in my opinion, this is also partly like WordPress to blame here. I mean, that should never be possible to have the default role as administrator.
Right, exactly.
Let me see if did I spell that correctly? Administrator looks good, right?
Yep.
So now we can already, let me drag that away again. Now you see we have the register button here popping up.
Yep.
So let's attacker 1. I'll have to use my email here, otherwise it won't go out the confirmation email.
Yep. So we just registered as attacker 1, and now we're going to get a welcome email of our new administrator account.
Wait, there it is.
So Calvin, of course, like all serious nerds, has like 5 screens open at the exact same time. So
yeah, and it's always one too little, no matter how many you add.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we got our email, and I'm setting a new password here. Let's take attacker 1 as well. Why not? Okay, it worked already. And now
Attacker 1,
and now we are administrator basically. So at that point, you're basically done.
You're done. You're owned. You're officially owned, and there's nothing to do. Well, and also for those of you that are like, well, I've got WordFence, and WordFence will notify me like if there's a new account created, or they also could have and would have inside of the database just deactivated any plugin that wasn't.
Yeah, correct. And this is also why you have to run security plugins like Fortress as must-use plugins.
Yep.
Because
they could have disabled, if you had an SMTP plugin that just notified you of any admin login or whatever, they just disable all of those things immediately, and then
they disable it before they create the accounts. And
absolutely,
because it's disabled in the database, you would never know that. Like
yep.
there's no way to know it. And unskilled hackers, they would like do obvious stuff, but if they're somewhat skilled, like at this point, they will leave a backdoor in here somewhere, depending on what plugins you have. Like maybe you have some plugins that load something from the database dynamically, or who knows what. It's so complex, nobody knows, right?
Yep.
But yeah, getting into here is bad.
Right. I mean, they can do whatever they want here. They've got full unfettered access to the database. They can install any plugins they want. They could install a plugin that looked exactly like WordFence, that was a mutilated WordFence, or whatever. Like they own you,
So let me now turn on Fortress.
So while you're waiting on those emails there, what we're going to be showing here is that Calvin has built Fortress in a way that allows you to say, once you are in production with a site, and you say, okay, we're shipping this is live, it's ready to go, you can basically lock down the administrator role and say that the administrator role only works if they have 2FA active, okay? And so he's created this second user, yeah?
Yeah, I just reset everything in the database real quick so it works.
Oh, okay.
I don't know, I think I might have only confirmed this email in AWS. It may be sent because this domain is still sandbox. I just set the email setting up, so it might be that might be it.
Yeah. Okay. So he just wasn't getting emails. So what this does now is that when someone has just unfettered access to your database and they hack you and they can now create a new administrator role, if you've configured Snicko correctly, or if Fortress correctly, then when they go to log in, they will not have a 2FA credential attached to their account. And so they will literally not be able to log in, even though they have an admin account on your site and they have admin access and admin role. They will not actually be able to take the next step because we've locked the box down.
I don't get the email to reset my password because it's not allowed for administrators to reset their password using the web UI. What I can do it in the CLI in a different screen.
Yeah. Well, what's the URL again?
It's playground.snico.io.
Yeah. So the problem with our demo here, Calvin, is that all of your
It's too secure.
it's too secure. We can't even show how to break these things. Okay, so I'm gonna call this Patrick. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen right now.
So I created a new password for this fake admin now so that we can test it. Okay.
I see. So I'm just gonna try it on my end here too. So
you won't get the email anyway.
Oh, right, because it's not going to show the reset anyway.
Yeah,
so,
but
okay, we'll go back to screen now.
Okay, so I have the password now because I reset it manually using the CLI. Attacker 2. And what happens is he doesn't get in.
Yeah, two-factor authentication is required for your account, but is not set up. This should not happen. Please contact your administrator. And so by having Fortress running as a must-use plugin, they can't disable it. So even though they have access to the options table and they literally could just go and say, turn off all the plugins, they can't turn off Fortress. And then if we have Fortress configured the way that we want to, even though they have unfettered access to the database, they still can't actually create. They can create an administrator role. They can create an administrator user, but then that administrator user can't do a password reset and can't ultimately log in because they don't have 2FA on. And so for a lot of users, or for a lot of website use cases, you're going to have ideally 1, maybe 2, maybe 3 admins, and obviously the fewer the better, but you're not going to add admins with really any frequency.
Or any other privilege role. There's no difference in Fortress between admin or whatever. You define privilege roles. It depends on your site. For example, by default, it's editor and administrator. But for example, if you're having I don't know, if you're using custom roles or WooCommerce, maybe you might add the shop administrator, and this would apply for all of these roles. Not only administrator.
So this isn't just admin. So like if they tried to go around this and create an editor account, you could have.
They couldn't. Yeah, it depends on what you define privileged as a privileged user on your site. Depends.
Yeah. So ultimately, at the end of the day, what we've seen is that a lot of 2FA and a lot of security plugins, if there's even a read SQL injection available,
they completely fall apart.
They fall apart
completely.
Yeah, and it's just pointless, and it's like it's wide open. But we're showing here, and for those that are not super knowledgeable about the difference between the extreme gap between a read SQL injection error and a write SQL injection error, we literally just created an admin account which now can't do anything, and so they can make 1,000 of them.
Maybe to explain a bit, the reason for this is because the way I will Fortress specifically like is the idea in mind to distribute it in hosting partnerships, because I know the environment where it runs there, and I know where I can safely store secrets, or encryption secrets and password hashing secrets, so that I don't have to store them in the database, right? Because what would happen with all other plugins right now, they are all storing their secrets for encryption, password hashing in the database. And what happens is the attacker could simply swap them out with his own ones. Or if he can only read, he can read them and also break in, right? The reason the attacker cannot do this here is because they're stored in a file system, or even better, in the environment later. For example, they get passed by Nginx to your PHP process. So there's no way to manipulate them short of having like a full server compromise. And at that point, there's nothing anything can do. Like if it's like as if somebody had root on your server, then there's nothing you can do.
Yeah. Well, and so by combining things like this, and we talked about this a little bit in yesterday's video, but combining things like an immutable file system inside of GridPane with something like this, and then layering in something like WP Scan or WordFence Intelligence, like you literally can't get closer to having WordPress operate as sort of like a traditional SaaS type multi-tenant application, because if you have
it gets to diminishing returns after that.
Yeah, you get to incredibly small diminishing returns. Like it'd be far easier to just break into my house, cut my finger off to get one of my factors to log into my laptop and you know, hold a gun to my head or whatever. It'd be easier to do that than to actually try to
and also, if somebody is not specifically targeting you and your site, at this point he'd be like, nah, fuck this, I'll just you like move on to the 20 other Elementor sites that I found while I was trying to set up this here, right?
Yeah,
Also
exactly.
And we also say, of course, like Fortress is not preventing like any not all of the bad things an attacker could do here. You could still go and change your site URL, and your site could be redirected elsewhere. There's nothing Fortress can do to prevent that. I mean, you could, but it would have a huge runtime performance hit if you were checking everything and moving everything out of where like is expected to be in WordPress. But at least they can't get into your site. They can't authenticate. They could still change stuff in your options table. They could redirect your site, but at the end of the day, they can't get in, and that is like what's important.
Yeah, right. Well, and again, it's like, and this is only version 1.0003 beta or whatever, you know. I mean, it's like as you continue to evolve this thing, maybe there will be different features that you add in that it's like, well, we lock these aspects of the options table, or we add these things into constants inside WP config or environment variables, where we go, now they can't change it. Now they can't redirect it. You know, like we could decide that certain things like that were useful features, you know, but again, at the end of the day, to be able to functionally stop an 8.8 out of 10 right SQL injection dead in its tracks by simply just saying, hey, my site's out there now and I'm not going to add any more admins. And you could just as easily turn this off, add an admin, add their 2FA credential, turn this back on, and now you've got a new admin with a
yeah. If you have that scenario, yeah, or you could also because everything can be done from the CLI, you could also do it from the CLI. So you can create an admin, and then you create 2FA credentials for that admin from the CLI, you being another admin. That would also work.
Yep. Super cool. All right, man. Well, I'm sure we'll have another interesting little diversion that we'll probably do tomorrow. I think we've fairly well covered it. I think we fairly well beat up the Elementor dead horse here. Yeah, super cool stuff, man. Looking forward to the next one.
All right, see you.
All right, cheers. Yep,
bye.
Bye.
Bye.